In this video, you will learn how to solve equations by factoring. Now, to solve an equation, we need to first understand what is called the multiplicative property of 0. And this says that if a equals 0 or b equals 0, then when I multiply a times b, I know the product will equal 0. So in other words, anything times 0 will equal 0, right? So if you have two numbers multiplied together and one of them is 0, we know that our solution will be 0. Now the converse of this is when we switch the if and the then part. So instead of saying if a equals 0 or b equals 0, then ab equals 0, the converse would be switching the if and the then part. So we would get instead, if ab equals 0, then a equals 0 or b equals 0. So this right here would also be true if we know that we have two numbers multiplied together equaling 0. Then we know that either the first number is 0 or the second number is 0. So both of these statements are true. And if we put this together into one statement, this is what we call the zero product property. And the zero product property says that this statement and the converse both are true. And the way we write this in shorthand is AB equals 0 if and only if A equals 0 or B equals 0. That phrase simply means that the statement and the converse is true. We can say it either way, and that's a true statement. Now this concept right here of the zero product property, this is the main concept that carries us through the idea of solving equations. Okay, solving equations by factoring, more specifically. So if we can get two numbers multiplied together equaling 0, we know that either the first number is 0 or the second number is 0. Alright, once you understand that concept and you understand how to factor, then we can put that together to solve any sort of equation. So here, example 1, we are told to solve for x. We have x times x minus 2 equals 0. So here we have our first number, which is x, is unknown, and then our second number, x minus 2. And when you multiply these together, it says our answer is 0. Well, based off the zero product property, we know that when we multiply two numbers together, and my answer is 0, that one of those two numbers must equal 0. So we know that either this first number, x, will equal 0, or we know that x minus 2 must equal 0. And then from here we can solve if needed. So the first one, x equals 0, that is already solved for us. Here x minus 2 equals 0. I can add 2 to both sides. So now I have x on the left side and 2 on the right side. So my solutions are x equals 0 or x would equal 2. So here we have two different answers for this equation. Okay, example 2. We have three things multiplied together. We have x times x minus 5 times 2x plus 3. So same idea. With the zero product property, we know that when we have two or more numbers multiplied together, and the answer is 0, that one of those numbers must equal 0. So here we have three numbers. We have x, we have x minus 5, and we have 2x plus 3. So one of those is equal to 0. So I set each of them equal to 0. X would equal 0, or x minus 5 is 0, or 2x plus 3 is 0. And then from here I can solve the ones that need to be solved. So x equals 0 is already solved for us. X minus 5 is 0. We can solve by adding 5 to both sides. So that gives me x equals 5. And then here we can subtract 3 to get 2x equals negative 3, and then divide by 2. So x would be negative 3 over 2. So here I have three solutions. X would equal 0, or x equals 5, or x equals negative 3 over 2. So we can have two or more answers depending on the number of numbers that I have multiplied together. So our first two examples have already been in the correct format for us, where we have everything completely factored so that everything is being multiplied together, and we have it so that it's equal to 0. If it does not look like this, then we need to make it to look like this by either factoring first or moving things over so that our left side is equal to 0 on the right side. And maybe a combination of the two. Maybe you have to move things around and then factor after that. So the next couple examples will walk you through where you need to factor and or move things around and set equal to 0. Here for example 3, we have 2x squared minus 11x equals negative 5. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that this is set equal to 0. So I need to bring this negative 5 to the left side, and I can do that by adding 5 to both sides. On the right side, negative 5 plus 5 would give me 0. And then on the left side, we have 2x squared minus 11x plus 5. So it's equal to 0. Now what we need to do is we must factor this left side so that everything is being multiplied together. Now to do that, we know that with a trinomial, we're going to have two binomials on the inside. So to get 2x squared, we would have 2x times x. So that takes care of the first term. And then to get 5, we need two numbers that multiply to get 5. And that could be 5 and 1. And we need them both negative because of this negative in the middle. So we need a negative 5 and a negative 1. Because when you multiply, they would get positive 5. Alright, so neither of these add up. These don't add up to negative 11 like we need. It's going to be negative 6, but keep in mind that there's a 2 in the front. So the 2 affects things as well. So if I put the negative 5 over here and the negative 1 with the 2x, when I multiply, I get a positive 5 back out. And when I multiply, I'm going to get negative 1x and negative 10x. So negative 1x and negative 10x, which would be negative 11x. And that would get my middle term. So when I factor, I can factor it as 2x minus 1 times x minus 5 equals 0. Now from here, we can solve. We have this set up so that we have two numbers, 2x minus 1 and x minus 5, multiply together to equal 0. So I know that either this first number, 2x minus 1, would equal 0, or x minus 5 must equal 0. And then from here I can solve. So the first one, I add 1 to both sides. So I have 2x equals 1, and then divide both sides by 2. X would equal 1 over 2. And then for the second equation, we can just add 5 to both sides, and x would equal 5. So my solution for example 3 would be 1/2 or 5. Example 4. We have 0 equals x squared minus 1 times x squared plus 3x plus 2. So here we are already equal to 0, so that is good. And then we need to factor further. So from here, we notice x squared minus 1. We can take that further. X squared plus 3x plus 2, I can take that further as well. X squared minus 1 is a difference of squares. That would factor as x minus 1 times x plus 1. Then x squared plus 3x plus 2. To get x squared, we would have x times x. To get 2, we would have 2 times 1, make them both positive, then multiply to get 2, and then 1 plus 2 would give me 3 for the middle term. And all of that is equal to 0. So we've factored completely on the right side. Now from here, because we have these numbers multiply together equaling 0, we know that one of them must equal 0. So I have either x minus 1 equals 0, x plus 1 equals 0, another x plus 1 equals 0, or x plus 2 equals 0. If I solve each of these, I'm going to have x equaling 1, x equals negative 1 again, and then x equals negative 2. Now with the double answer, there's no need to write it twice. So my answers would simply be 1, negative 1, or negative 2. One more example with example 5. We have x to the third power plus 6x squared equals 27x. And the first thing I want to do is set this equal to 0. So to make that happen, I bring the 27x over to the left side, and I do that by subtracting 27x. So when I do that on the left side, I'm going to have x to the third plus 6x squared minus 27x. On the right side, 27x minus 27x will cancel, and that's going to give me 0. So now I can look at this left side and determine how I can factor. So notice that each term has an x in common. So the greatest common factor would be an x. So I can pull that x out, and in parentheses I'm left with something. Well, x times x squared gives me x to the third power. X times 6x will give me 6x squared. And x times negative 27 will give me negative 27x. So I can factor to get this, and that's still equal to 0. Now the x squared plus 6x minus 27, that can factor. And to factor that, we would have an x and an x to get x squared. To get 27, we need either 1 times 27 or 3 times 9. 1 needs to be positive, and then 1 needs to be negative. And those numbers would have to add to give me 6. Well, if I do a positive 9 and a negative 3, those would multiply to get negative 27 and would add to get positive 6. So that would factor to get x plus 9 times x minus 3. And then you have the x in the front. So from here, we're all set up to solve. We have everything being multiplied together. We have it equal to 0. So with the zero product property, we know that if we have two or more numbers multiplied together and the product is 0, then one of those numbers must equal 0. So either x is 0, x plus 9 is 0, or x minus 3 is 0. And then I solve each of those. X would be 0 or negative 9, or x would equal 3. Now as we finish, just a word of caution. So here at the beginning, what you do not want to do is you do not want to transform an equation by dividing both sides by a variable. So like here you might have thought, oh, they each have an x on both sides, and maybe your thought was you can divide everything by x. Well, if you do that, you would have the x's cancel. This would become 1x. This would become x squared. What's going to happen, basically, is you're going to lose one of your answers. All right, if you would have done that, you would have had x squared plus 6x equals 27. Rearrange that, x squared plus 6x minus 27 equals 0, which is this part right here. So what would have happened is you would have missed out on this x in the beginning, which, notice as you carry it down, you get x equals 0 from that x in the front. So do not divide, because in this case you would have lost your solution of 0. Alright, so just bring everything to one side and set it equal to 0, and then factor, and then set each part equal to 0 from there. And that concludes our lesson for today. We will see you next time.